Hello and welcome to Global Eye, a US election special. Thursday night saw Donald Trump and Joe Biden being questioned by journalists and voters. NBC's Savannah Guthrie grilled the president about his response to the coronavirus pandemic, white supremacists, and the state of his finances as well. Joe Biden was questioned by ABC's George Stephanopoulos, who asked the Democrat candidate whether he would back the Supreme Court with more judges. Listen in to these excerpts first.
Did you take a test on the day of the debate, I guess, is the bottom line?
I probably did, and I took a test the day before and the day before, and I was always in great shape, and I was in great shape for the debate. As president, I can't be locked in a room someplace for the next year and just stay and do nothing.
When a president doesn't wear a mask or makes fun of folks like me when I was wearing a mask for a long time, then, people say, well, it mustn't be that important.
Has your opinion changed on the importance of mask wearing?
No, because I was okay with the masks. I was good with it, but I've heard many different stories on masks.
You ain't black. What do you have to say to young black voters who see voting for you as further participation in a system that continually fails to protect them?
If young black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do that.
I have done more for the African-American community than any president, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln.
Just this week, you retweeted to your 87 million followers a conspiracy theory that Joe Biden orchestrated to have SEAL Team 6, the Navy SEAL Team 6, killed to cover up the fake death of bin Laden.
That was an opinion of somebody, and that was a retweet. I'll put it out there. People can decide for themselves.
You're
I don't
the
take a
president.
position.
You're not like someone's crazy uncle.
All right, that was quite a heated exchange there with Donald Trump. Let's move on. With elections less than 3 weeks away, Joe Biden has an 11-point lead over Donald Trump. According to a Wall Street Journal NBC poll, while Trump has recovered from a 14-point deficit a few weeks back, but he's still trailing by 8 points. More than 60% of voters feel the country is headed in the wrong direction. The survey also indicated that the economy was the #1 issue, but not the only deciding factor. Regarding the president's coronavirus diagnosis, just 1/4 of the people surveyed said that Trump was actually taking the necessary precautions. Let's go across to Micah Roberts, Republican pollster, somebody who has been managing polls for Wall Street Journal and NBC since 2010. Now, my first question to you, Micah, the president is trailing by 11 points for the moment, according to your polls. Can he still cover grounds in the swing states?
Well, we're at the most exciting time of our election season right now, and there certainly is a large gap to cover for the president. But as you know, that's a national number, and our system is set up in such a way that it really does matter most in the swing states. These things have the opportunity to close late and quickly, and the reason that is because there is a chunk of people in the electorate who will decide late and close late, and make their decision late. Many millions of people in our country have already voted. So there are a lot of barriers to closing that gap. But the thing is, I think anything is possible.
Also, Micah, what do American voters, both Republicans and Democrats, feel about where the U.S. is headed?
Well, in our survey, we found that 29% say that we're going in the right direction, which is a pretty low number. It got up into the mid-30s and 40s. A lot has happened in 4 years, and a lot has happened really in the last 7 months to change those numbers. But it was on one measure pretty encouraging. 50% of voters said that they and their family are doing better than they were 4 years ago, with 34% saying they're worse off. And that was, I think, a reflection of a very strong economy that we had for many years. Honestly, I think even though we've dealt with the pandemic in different ways in different states, things could be certainly a lot worse. 58% of voters said that the country is worse off than it was 4 years ago, and that is again another barrier for an incumbent president to overcome. There is sharp division in our politics in our country, and that is reflected in all of these numbers.
And finally, Micah, what issues will decide this election?
The issues that are important to Trump voters and Republicans are very different than the issues that are important to Democrats and Biden voters. So, for instance, for Trump voters, the most important issue by a long shot is the economy. 68% of Trump voters say that's the most important issue in deciding who they will vote for president. But for Biden voters and Democrats, the main issue is the coronavirus and dealing with that, followed by health care. And then there are large gaps between how Republicans, or well, really how Trump voters and Biden voters feel about climate change, about crime and violence in our country right now, about race relations. It couldn't be a more polarized setting when it comes to the issues that we care about.
Thank you so much, Micah, for joining us. At the end of it, it will all boil down to what happens in those 6 to 8 swing states in the final lap. Let's move on. How are Indian Americans going to vote in this election? According to the Indian American Attitude Survey conducted by YouGov, Carnegie Endowment, Johns Hopkins and University of Pennsylvania, at least 72% of registered Indian Americans want to support Joe Biden. And contrary to popular belief that events like Howdy Modi and Namaste Trump may have galvanized Indian American voters in favor of Donald Trump, this may really not be true on the ground. We're now joined by Milan Vaishnav, Senior Fellow and Director, South Asia Project at Carnegie Endowment. Milan, thank you very much for joining us. Indian Americans comprise less than 1% of the registered voter base in the United States. How much do they really matter in this election?
Well, I think that despite being just 1% of the voter base, they are receiving disproportionate attention this time, I think for a couple of reasons. One is that the growth in the size of the Indian American population has been nothing short of massive. Between 2000 and 2018, the Indian population in America has grown by 150%. What that means is that in some electorally crucial swing states, like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, like Florida, Indian Americans are actually larger than the margin of victory in the 2016 election. So their votes have become more important. Secondly, I think there is a sense, because of the partnership between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, that the Republicans feel that this constituency, which has primarily been very Democratic leaning, is up for grabs, that a closer U.S.-India relations might actually be able to bring them towards the Republican Party. And so as a result, I think we're seeing both parties really court their votes this election season.
So you feel that the Howdy Modi rally in Texas, the Namaste Trump event that we saw in India, that did not have any impact on American voters as such? Indian American voters?
Well, you know, what we found in the survey is that of registered voters who are Indian Americans, 72% of them plan to vote for Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, this November, compared to just 22% for Donald Trump. So we do not find really any evidence of the widespread defection of Indian Americans away from the Democratic Party towards the Republican Party. Furthermore, when Indian Americans are asked, what is it that most animates you? What policy issue, as you think about your vote this year, their answers are dominated by things like healthcare, things like the economy, things like racism and racial discrimination. U.S.-India relations actually is next to last. Only 3% of Indian Americans who are planning on voting say that's the most important issue to them. So I would say that those things, while important for the community, do not directly translate into votes.
Right. Also, Milan, the people you surveyed, were they traditionally Democrat voters, or is there an anti-Trump sentiment also at play over here, which is leading to greater mobilization of Indian American voters towards Joe Biden?
Well, look, I think from all of the data we have going back to the mid 2000s, it is clear that Indian Americans are very pro-democratic. They tend to have more liberal views. They tend to associate themselves with the Democratic Party, and they tend to turn out to vote, whether it's Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, or Joe Biden in presidential elections. So that's not new. I think what is new is the feeling that that Donald Trump, although he may be good for U.S.-India relations, is not necessarily going to do very much for the Indian American community here in the United States. Indian Americans have been beneficiaries of an open immigration system. He would like to close that. Indian Americans have been victims of discrimination. Oftentimes, many of his actions have been perceived to actually inflame that. Indian Americans are by and large a pretty religiously diverse community here in the United States, and Donald Trump has said quite a number of controversial things, particularly against Muslims, for instance.
Would it be safe to assume that the approval ratings for Donald Trump amongst Indian Americans is rather low?
It is. When you ask in the aggregate how Donald Trump is doing, more than 2/3 say they disapprove of how he has performed as president. Interestingly, they are somewhat more mixed on how he has done with U.S.-India relations, showing that they can actually disaggregate between foreign policy and his presidency as a whole.
Talking about Kamala Harris, that was a moment that India celebrated quite a bit. Do you think Kamala Harris's nomination as the vice presidential pick for Joe Biden actually mobilized more support for Joe Biden among the Indian American community?
I think there's no question. I think there was a lot of speculation when Harris was announced as Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate. Would she be a net positive, a net negative, or just neutral and have no difference on the voting patterns? And what we're seeing, in fact, is that she has really enthused, energized the Indian American voting public. Now, that could go in two ways. Either she could make them more enthusiastic about Biden or less enthusiastic. Our survey shows unambiguously a near majority of Indian Americans that we surveyed say she has made them more enthusiastic about Biden's candidacy. When you ask them why, the number one response is because she is of Indian heritage.
Right. And, coming to my final set of questions, what do you think will be the impact on Indo-US ties, especially with regard to immigration, H1B, with regard to trade, if Donald Trump returns to power?
Look, frankly, my own personal view is I don't think that this is going to return good things for the Indian American community. We have seen Donald Trump take on not just immigration from our southern border when it comes from Mexico, South and Central America, but also serious curbs on student visas, on H1B visas, on visas for the spouses and partners of H1B workers. And we know that 1 out of every 2 H1B visa goes to Indian Americans. We've seen on trade a spirit of partnership dissolve into one of animosity, where both sides have started to raise protectionist barriers, where we are seeing a real clash. And so I do think that the Democrats will take a different view on both of those things. I think the area where we will see probably less change is on foreign policy, national security, and defense, where there is by and large a bipartisan consensus that the U.S. and India must deepen ties, not least because of the China factor.
Thank you very much, Milan Vaishnav, for joining us. So Indians comprise less than 1% of the total registered voters in the United States, but they could play a crucial role in all those 6 to 8 swing states in the final lap of election 2020. On that note, we take a short break, but when we return, we look at the impact of this election on H1B visas and the broader trajectory of India-US ties. Well, Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. For the last 6 months, we have seen changes to U.S. immigration rules to restrict entry of foreign workers who, according to the U.S. administration, may undercut Americans in the job market. The recent interim H1B visa rules are a case in point. While the overall trajectory of IndoUS ties remains positive, a lot depends on who wins the election in November. Tackling China and further enhancing the U.S., India, Japan, Australia Quad grouping were priorities outlined by U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biden during his recent visit to India. So what lies ahead after the 3rd of November? We are now joined by Shivendra Singh, Vice President, Global Trade Department at NASSCOM, and Richard Rosso, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Shivendra, if I can begin with you, the latest interim rules, the tweaks to the H1B visa policy, how is it going to impact H1B workers?
Thank you so much for inviting me. If you look at the last 6 months, that has seen a slew of measures that have been a challenge to the high-skilled visa program with the ostensible objective to protect American jobs. But when you look at, the whole geopolitical environment, during the pandemic, I think this is something which has been there. But in reality, what will happen is that any restriction on, access to global talent will in fact prove counterproductive and will be harmful to the American economy as well as growth of jobs. And this is based on American data. When we look at the unemployment figures, the overall unemployment figures rose quite drastically from 4% in January, as high as about 13%, and then it's come down to nearly 8% in September. During the same period, the unemployment for the computer occupations, in fact, has changed from about 3 to 3.5%. It was about 2.5%. So in September, so there's, practically remained the same. We've also had about nearly more than 500,000 job vacancies in the computer occupation. So if we see that the unemployment overall is high, but at the same time, there are job vacancies in computer occupation, that is a very, very clear testimony to the fact that the existing workforce is not being able to fill those jobs. Hence, the role of H1Bs or short-term high-skilled visa workers is very important to bridge the gap. And secondly, it's also very important that once you have people who are critical skills, it also increases job creation in the US because teams are constituted in a way where jobs grow in the US. So that's also going to be hampered given this situation.
All right. Rick, coming to you, do you feel that some of these immigration changes that Donald Trump has brought about, including raising the wage criteria for foreign workers, do you think this will be easy to overturn? Do you think this is only linked to elections and things might change post the 3rd of November?
Well, I think, Vice President Biden may have an interest in maintaining the legacy that he created with President Obama. So, for instance, some of the measures that they've taken, like revoking the ability for spouses of H1Bs to get visas, they may want to restore some of the things that President Obama had introduced and President Trump had taken away. I think in terms of real liberalization of U.S. immigration policy, obviously India's powerful technology industry, has vast employment here in the United States, thousands of employees for major companies like TCS, HCL, and others. But once I think U.S. corporate executives, too, that are starting to feel the pinch that these, job openings that are out there that are being unfilled, that are going to help the economy power through this difficult period, if they start using leverage they've got with elected members of Congress, then I think you got an opportunity to see real change. So some of it will be restoring good things that were introduced during the Obama administration. Other things I think are going to be driven more by what the private sector thinks they need to sort of power through the other end of COVID. So we'll wait and see when I think more U.S. companies begin using their voice a little bit more powerfully up on Capitol Hill.
Okay. Shivendra, do you get a sense that a number of H1B workers in the United States, IT workers, have lost their jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic? There has been a decline in the number of Indians actually getting H1B visas as well?
Well, good question. If you look at Indian nationals, the 2019 data suggests that about nearly 72% of the H1B visas, go to Indian nationals. which is a clear testimony to the fact that they are skilled workers and they are in high demand. But if you look at Indian tech, and that's where I think this is not an Indian tech or US tech issue, this is an overall tech issue. Indian companies, the top 7 Indian companies, which comprise the more than 90% of the H1B visas, have declined by nearly 60% from 2015, which was about 15,000. It's come down to about nearly 5,500, which is just what, 6% of the 85,000 visas. So if that be the case, the Indian companies have declined the H1B visa usage from 2015 onwards. So it's because of the various trends in terms of digital transformation, in terms of the business model. Right. So that's happened, but nonetheless they are critical.
Okay, Rick, coming to you, just to speak about the broader trajectory of Indo-US ties, we're going to have the 2+2 very soon. Stephen Biden was here very recently. He called China the elephant in the room. He said that we need to have greater momentum in Indo-US ties. We have been far too cautious with the Quad. What do you think will be the next president's immediate foreign policy priority vis-a-vis India?
Well, I do think that China will continue to be heavy on everybody's radar screen. It was true during the Obama administration, though, I think in typical administrations, foreign policy evolves a bit more slowly. So you saw the announcement of the rebalance, the pivot. A lot of our Asian partners were asking, what's the substance behind it? There were very few direct and immediate things that were triggered by the announcement of the pivot, the rebalance. With President Trump to announce the free and open Indo-Pacific, including India a little bit more deeply, I think, than was there for the pivot, the rebalance. I do think that you're going to see a continuation about trying to shore up partnerships and alliances across the region as we begin to see China strike out more aggressively in multiple directions. COVID has not been a period of respite. You've actually seen more aggressive pursuits, of course, along India's border, maritime issues, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, Hong Kong, Taiwan. China is pushing out in multiple fronts. So that's got to continue to be high on the radar screen. And clearly, the kind of cooperation that we've seen with India in deepening our defense and security partnership provides real ballast to make sure that that's going to be maintained. So no question that China will be central, that cooperation with India will be central as well. But you do hope that it becomes a bit more well-rounded. Right. So far, a lot of our discussions with India, the more positive areas have been really focused on defense and security. The economic relationship is flailing, at least between our two governments. You actually see pretty good numbers in terms of trade and investment, at least pre-COVID. But, relations between the capitals, they can't even cobble together a tiny little agreement to resolve some of these little disputes. Actually, the number of disputes is infinitely higher than when the negotiation on the small group began. So I do think there's areas that we can certainly strengthen, particularly in the econ sector.
Okay. Right. So I'm going to take the final round of questions. Mr. Singh, do you feel that at a time when the US is trying to move away from China, India is also trying to look at alternate supply chains, there is a big opportunity for the Indian tech industry here and the tech industry in the United States to collaborate as well?
Absolutely. And I think we are already collaborating in a big way. There are various areas, that we've been working on. I think if you look at artificial intelligence, for example, I think that's, a big area of focus. Where we need to build trust, and I think and ethics and trust are some key areas where we are trying to see how we can work together on. We're also seeing, that, there is a personal data protection bill moved in India. We did a piece of research jointly with a US think tank on that part and trying to see how we can look at movement of data, which is absolutely critical between the India and the US from an ease of doing business while security considerations are considered.
Right.
So there are a lot of areas that, we are working in partnership and in tandem. And the most critical part is the Indian tech industry works with more than 75% of the Fortune 500 companies, majority of the American companies. So they enable them to grow, create more jobs, and make America the economy that it is. So, there is a very, very close partnership. Right. And even bilateral trade, if you look at the numbers, majority of the growth is going to happen in the tech sector. So this is probably going to be the most important sector.
Okay.
Partnership between India and the US.
All right, Rick, we've completely run out of time, but in about 20 seconds, if you could tell us, what is the road ahead for the trade deal? Do you think whoever comes to the White House after 3rd of November would like to take a look at it afresh?
Yeah, I mean, it's there. It's practically crafted. There's a couple more things I think both sides could add in that would make it stronger. But because it's so close to crystallization, I don't think it's going to be taken off the table. But I do think the day that the agreement is signed, the fight begins again because there's so many other issues that aren't going to be included.
Right. Thank you so much, Rick and Mr. Shivendra Singh, for joining us here on a very interesting discussion about H1B visas and the broader trajectory of Indo-US ties as well. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Live, but we leave you with visuals of US President Donald Trump shaking a leg at the Florida rally a few days after shaking off the coronavirus.